Hello and welcome to our tutorial. So in this tutorial here we're going to have a look at this wonderful game here. This is Far Cry. It's Far Cry 5 actually. And someone using their yes, not very violent. Anyway, so as we look at this, what we've got is a very dynamic, so you've got the wind through the bushes and in the trees, a very dynamic sort of outdoor environment, which is, very full of detail. So it allows us to have a first-person sort of experience, be it as we see here in a vehicle or walking through an environment. So we're going to start in Unity. So this is Unity 5.51. So if I jump back in here and open a tab and go to Unity, one of the many issues we'll encounter with Unity is versions. So this is the new version of it, so Unity 2017.3, which I think we'll end up using shortly in the college, but is not installed at the moment. And as versions as we peel through versions, we'll get backward compatibility issues. So we have to make sure we're all sort of on the same page and all using the same version, or things won't work. So this is 5.5.1. So I'm going to hit New here and create a new project. And I'm going to call the project FCry, simply because that's what we're going to, in this tutorial, going to emulate. It's going to go into this folder here, and it's going to be a 3D game, and I've left this on, and I'm going to hit Create Project. So Unity is going to auto-load, and we're going to have a quick exploration of the interface, and then rather than dwelling on any theory, we'll just get stuck in making a very basic, very simple level. So it's telling me there's a new version or a newer version available, so I was going to ignore that. And what we've got here is, this is up on the top here, the editor. So this is where we place things and manipulate objects like you would in Blender. This is what the camera sees. This is the finished game. So what you see is what you get, is the sort of setup in Unity. So what you see here is what the finished game will look like. If it looks poor here, then on export it's not going to look any better. So this is the finished game. The hierarchy here is a list of all of the things that are in the level that you're currently working on, and then the project is everything in the project, everything in the folder. So you could have maybe content here for 5 or 6 different levels, and then whichever level you were editing or changing at a particular time would be available here in the hierarchy. So generally you work, each level is referred to here as a scene, so you've got a scene menu up here. So this is what we're currently working on, is in this folder. The project folder has all our assets in it, and then over here the main window that we work on is the inspector. So if I select the camera, its properties will come up in the inspector. So there's my camera. It's got a skybox. I can change that to be a solid color, and we've suddenly got a color in the background. And then I've got a directional light, and again I can change that like you can in Blender to a point light or a spotlight like a cone. So we'll leave it as a directional light, which is like a sun. So we want to make something remotely like Far Cry. So let's get stuck in. So I want to add a game object, and I want to add a game object that is a terrain. So I'm going to click on this here, and it's added in this white plane. Now with my mouse over here, if I press F, it will focus or sort of center the object on sort of the origin of it. So this is not dissimilar to Blender and how you navigate. So if you hold down the right mouse button, you can rotate in 3D space, you can zoom in and out, and if you hold down the middle mouse button, you can pan left, right, and go up and down. So we can see most of our objects quite simply. This here is, one second, go back here to my inspector. This here is a widget. So in Blender you can click the numpad and change your view. So I can go from top view. I can click here in the bottom to switch from orthographic to perspective, and then I can look from the right, from the front, from the left, from underneath, and then from above, and then I can spin it to a user view as well. Okay, I'm going to select my terrain and press F, and it'll center it up for me. And then over here I've got all of my terrain tools. So it says no tool selected. So the first thing we're going to do is select this first tool, and this is going to allow us to basically manipulate the terrain. So I've got a brush size, so I'm going to increase that 3/4 way, and now you can see I've got a blue area here over my terrain, and then the opacity is basically the strength of the brush. So I'm going to actually make this as large as possible, and just to show you here, I can type in, say, 200, and then it will fail. So it's got a maximum brush size of 100, which when we go over here and look at the terrain size, so it's set to 500 by 500, can be, if you want to do broad brushes, can be a bit of a problem. But so we've got a large brush and a strength. So we're going to draw here in the center, and we'll have a little look here what we've got. So I'm going to draw. I don't want it to be too, I don't want one big large point in the middle, because then I will have nothing to sort of traverse. It won't be flat enough. So the next thing I'm going to do is click on the next tool here beside me, and this is paint height, and I can set a maximum height size here, and then I can flatten to that height. Okay, so I'm going to undo that so we keep so let's bring this back down to say 23, and when I hit flatten, everything will go to there. So alternatively, what we can do is we can you can see it reducing the size to the height that we have kind of designated here. So it'll bring everything up to a single height. So let's do that. Let's flatten out sort of a plateau or an island. And then we'll go back to our first tool and add in a little bit of variety. Okay, and that way we've got a flattish area that we can kind of traverse when we get into play. So I'm going to leave this terrain physically as it is here. It is possible to import height maps and make things that are far more complex and beautiful than this, but this is just hopefully a short and simple example of what can be done. So the next thing here is it says smooth height. So I can draw here and smooth out some of the work that I've done. So if this is probably more useful if I had earlier used a very almost like a stencil here to kind of create a more rugged terrain. So I'm going to make this a bit smaller, a bit weaker. So if I'd so I'm trying to make sort of cliffs here, or make my terrain a little bit more interesting. Let's say the side of my mountain here. So then when I come to my third tool, my smooth tool, and I go and say select this one here, you'll see this is how this works. So you can see it's sort of getting rid of a lot of the more unpleasant kind of spiky detail that is visible on some of that. So we'll leave that as is though. That's fine. Now, this next tab here is for textures. Now, if you wanted to do, you can paint this in quite complex ways, but we're just going to do a simple paint on it now. So I'm going to go Edit Texture and Add Texture. And as in 3D software, when you add in a texture, it's normally a JPEG, like a texture image. So this image here is for normal maps, and this is just for a diffuse color map. So I'm going to click here, and it's saying that I don't have any maps to choose from. Let me close that window there. So normally what you do is you click here, and then you would see what is listed in your assets folder as a texture to use. So let's just pause for a second and have a look at. So in my project here, I've got my terrain and I've got nothing else. So what I'm going to do is there are assets, which are basically just presets or pre-made objects and pre-made textures that we can use. So I'm going to go Assets, Insert or Import Package, and the package I want to import is Environment. So I'm going to click on that, and it's going to come in. Now that was downloaded automatically when I downloaded Unity and installed Unity. And it's saying all of these things here will now be available to me as standard assets when I import them. And if we just take a note here that in the project window there's no folder, and when I import this, it's going to create a folder here and add all of this material into it. And the sort of an important sort of aside to that, if you want to put something into this project that to use, be it a character or a gun or a car or a building, whatever it might be, if it's not in this folder structure here, if it's not in the project window, then it cannot be in the game. So everything that's going to be in your game will be in this project window. Okay, so we're just going to let all this load in here. Some of the asset packages can be quite complex and take quite a while to import. So obviously, depending on the size of the package, how complex it is, and what you're trying to get it to do, it can take quite a while. So here's my standard assets, and inside my standard assets there are a number of subfolders, and I've got water and all sorts of things. So I'm going to go back to my terrain, I'm going to click on it here, and now I'm going to go Edit Textures, Add Texture, and when I select this time you can see that there's a whole bunch of things in here. So the first thing I'm going to pick is sand, and when I do that, when I hit Add, the entire island will take on this texture. So there is my terrain texture. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hit Edit Texture again and add another texture, and then go back to Select. And this time I'm going to look for a different one, and let's pick this one here, Grassy Rock. And hit Add. Now I'm going to select this, and it's a very subtle sort of blue box that goes around the texture that's selected. And again, I've got my brush size and how its opacity, so its strength. So we're going to move over here, and I'm going to start drawing. So this is kind of a more cliff-like texture. So I'm going to draw that onto. So hang on, set my strength here. So you can see it being drawn onto the island, and I'm going to try and limit it to putting it sort of on the cliff area. Now I'm going to add in another texture, and this time I'm going to add in something that's a bit more kind of grassy. So there's a grass texture there. So grassy hill. I'm going to select that one, and again I'm going to change how its opacity, so that a little bit of what's underneath will kind of come through. And now some of my rocks have turned green, so I don't want that, so I'm going to go back here, maybe reduce my brush size a little bit so I can be a bit more exact, and increase the strength here so that these are not okay. So we're kind of starting to see so now I'm going to go back to my grass, and this time I'm going to reduce its strength considerably, and then maybe up here near the top I can draw a little bit in of green. Okay, so you can see very quickly that I've got 3 different textures, and that instead of having to use kind of splat maps and a very complicated stenciling, that this allows me to add in lots and lots of textures and mix them all together quite seamlessly. Now some of these aren't great, the ones that the default textures that come with it. You can see sort of their repeat patterns, but if you spend a bit of time painting, you could very easily create paths, and if I so you could create quite nice sort of textures and customize your environments a lot. You could draw in roads and all sorts of things. So I'm going to stop texturing it for now and zoom out a little bit, and then I'm going to go to this next tab here, which is Edit Trees. So again, if I hadn't imported my standard assets, I would have nothing to choose, but I'm going to go Edit Tree, Add Tree. And if you've never used Unity before, it has this kind of interface characteristic, which if you see a small circle, you'll see them over here. You can click on it and it'll open an add menu, so you can add something to the box. So I've got a broadleaf tree, and then it has one for mobile, which has probably got fewer verts in it. So, and then I've got a conifer. So let's bring in my broadleaf mobile and see what we get. So that's my broadleaf mobile, and again I've got my brush size and my tree density. So let's just go in here, and on this side we'll draw some trees. Now, to negatize what I've done, so if I don't like what I've done, I can hold down, so I'm just going to reduce my brush size here. I can hold down my the control key, and it will remove what's underneath the brush. So we've got a couple of trees there, and we'll add a couple more in over here. Maybe 1 or 2 there, 1 or 2 there. Okay, so we have some trees, and you can see over here I've got random rotation, tree height. I can expand, so I can get very small ones. We'll try that maybe up here in the back. We'll reduce the height, so maybe the ones that are up high are a little bit smaller. But you can see already that you can add in, like, there's quite a lot of, it's possible to get quite a bit of variety from just a simple set of tools. Now, after I've added in my trees, now I could decide I'm going to add in a different type of tree. So these are all the same, so maybe we'll add in this conifer, just so it doesn't all look exactly the same. So we'll zoom in here, and we'll change the tree, we'll reduce the density but increase the size of the brush, so we're not adding in that many more. Oh, these are all very small, so let's bring that back up here, and there's a couple more, maybe too many, so again we'll reduce the density to reduce my brush size, and I'm going to hold down the control key and remove the ones that are a little strangely placed. Okay, again, this is just an example, so we'll leave that for now. So now I'm going to go back to my inspector, and I'm going to go move on to the next tab, which is details. So I'm going to go edit detail, add grass, and again we have this dialog box. So I'm going to click on this here, and I'm going to pick a type of grass. So let's see what we've got here. So we've got grass, hills. This looks promising. So go add. So here's my grass, and I'm going to zoom in, and you can see as I get closer the detail increases. I'm only going to put the grass in this sort of open area here, so I'm going to increase my brush size, and I'm going to paint in some grass. Oh, and I've got no need to increase these here. So I'm going to paint in some grass. Now I'm painting over and you can't see the grass appearing, which is a bit weird. So let's have a look at what's going on there. So as I zoom in and get closer, hopefully what you can see is there is grass and it has been added, but it's only visible at a certain distance. So let's go and change that. So I'm going to go into my settings, and it says detail distance. Now obviously the further away we can see this material, the bigger the strain we place on the PC. Okay, so we have a lot of grass, probably too much, so I'm going to hold down my control key. Oops, go back into my grass here. Hold down my control key and remove some of it. Okay, so that's not too bad. So, the next thing we're going to do, so I'm going to leave my terrain. Now there's all sorts of things I can do here in the terrain. I've got wind speed for the grass. I can go back to the trees and I can make them, I can animate them and make them sway in the wind. These settings here are really interesting. They're to do with at what point do the trees stop being three-dimensional and become billboards, become 2D, and it does that quite seamlessly. As we zoom out, they stop being, they turn into pictures of trees as opposed to having branches, etc. Okay, so I'm just gonna, we're 23 minutes in, so we've got a good bit done. But let's add, let's see if we can add a little bit more to what we're doing here. So we've got water, and there's all sorts of water prefabs. So this is water, it says Pro Daytime. So I'm just going to drag and drop that in here and let go. Let's see what we get. I'm going to, what we haven't talked about, we haven't manipulated anything over here really. This is move the view, and then this is move an object. So I'm going to move this up a bit in 3D space. This is rotate it. This is scale, and then this is for working with. It's normally for working with the UI, but we'll come back to that. So this is my my Water Pro daytime. Let's go to scale, and we'll scale this. Oops. And we'll scale it this way. Okay. And we will take it and just center it up on our island a little bit. And then over here we have all sorts of interesting properties, which we most of which are, this is the properties of the shader of the water. This is like the material. So I'm going to click on my camera and see where my camera is among all of this. So this camera is actually below the waterline. So I'm going to lift it up, and I'm going to move this camera forward, and now I'm going to move it to the right, and I'm suddenly underground, and I'm going to move it up a little bit, maybe off to the left. I'm going to look at this from the top, and I'm going to go to rotate, and I'm just going to rotate and look out that way, and I'm going to press play, and when I press play I'll start the game, and nothing's going to move. I don't have a character that can move, but when this turns blue we will have basically engaged the game engine. And what you can see here is I've got my the grass is moving in the wind, and I can see my water in the distance, but it doesn't go all the way to the horizon. So so again, I've got a whole bunch of things to use. So I'm going to go back to my water, and I'm going to delete it. I'm going to take my water plane and drag that in here, and we'll press play on that and see if that will auto. So some of them will autofill to the horizon, and some of them, like this, will not. Let's see if we can see this guy. So we're looking off that way. No, we can't. No. Okay, so we'll go back to our water plane here and delete that. So just so we see, well actually we'll stay with daytime since we're during the day. So we're going to drag this in, and we're going to raise the water level up, move it into the center. Actually, let's put it bang center 0, 0. So let's type up here 0. So this is the transform. So 0, 0, 0. And then we will scale it up here. So we'll scale it up by, say, 200. And not on Y, on Z, whoops, by 200. Okay, I'm going to look from above. And place that. Okay. And then if we remember, or if we didn't actually really look at this, so if I click on my terrain and I go back to my settings, my terrain is width and length is 500 by 500, which is in meters. So this is 500 meters squared, the whole square here. So this is now 200 by 200 meters. So let's make that 500 by 500. Okay, and let's extend it to 1,000 by 1,000. So it is a kilometer square. Cool. Now I'm going to go back to my water here and see if I can. So I've got my water scale, and if you're closer to the water, you're going to want to see more detail, etc. So that's what that slider's for. And then depending on how powerful your computer is, you may want to turn up or turn down these, depending on if you want it to actually reflect the environment that's around it. Okay, so we have some water. It's basic enough, and now we're going to go to our camera, not our camera, sorry, our light, and we're going to have a look at this light. Now, like in Blender, if you've got a sun, its position is irrelevant. What's most important is its rotation. So let's rotate this and get ourselves some interesting shadows. Okay, so and now we're going to click on our camera, and these are the settings of the camera. So so we can add a whole bunch of really interesting things here. So we've got a skybox, that is this blue sky here, and you can swap in and out skyboxes to get different cloud effects, and you can have dynamic skies, so clouds moving overhead that are literally drag and drop events. I can zoom in and zoom out like you can in the camera in Blender, and I can set my clipping, so how far I can see. So if I reduce this clipping plane to say 500, that's as far as the camera can see. And if you look at oops, now I'm way up at 2000, so you get an idea of what's visible and what's not visible to the camera. Okay, so this is a straightforward enough setup. We could improve definitely on the quality of our water and have it infinitely go out to the horizon. We could drop in a different sky. There's all sorts of nice things we could do, but so actually let's drop in a different sky. So go to lighting and we'll click on skyboxes, and we've got what ones come with this. So I've got my default, and do I get anything else? No. Well, before we finish up, we might import a new one and make it a little more, the lighting a little more interesting. So before we finish up, what I want to do is make this more like a game. So I'm going to go assets, import packages, and I'm going to import characters. Now this isn't going to import 3D meshes, or at least that's not what we're going to use it for. This is going to import a whole bunch of pre-made kind of physics objects, things that have colliders and mouse look scripts, and basically all of the basic functionality you would want controlled in a game. So if I move my mouse, the camera will rotate with it. If I press WASD, that the character will move forwards and backwards, etc. So those characters were added in here to this standard assets folder that was created earlier by Unity, and I've got different characters I can use. So we're making a first-person game, so I'm going to go to first-person character and prefabs. Now prefab is a pre-made object that can be used repeatedly in a game. So something like a bullet would be a prefab. You'd create a prefab from your object with whatever characteristics and scripts it needs, and then you can reuse that object again and again. A non-player character would be the same. So these are prefabs that can be used. So I've got a rigid body first-person shooter controller or a first-person shooter controller. The rigid body one is going to have more realistic physics, and this is going to have a more physics that we program in scripting rather than using the default settings of the physics engine in Unity. So I'm going to use this one here, and I'm going to drag and drop it into my game, and I'm going to delete my existing main camera because this has built into it a camera. So let's move this up and look at it from the side. We'll move in here, and let's move it in over the island, and I'm going to press F, and then this is the rigid body controller. So this green object here is a capsule collider, and it gives the character height and collision. So this is what's actually interacting with the ground, this green area here. And you can see I've got, if I go back to my inspector here, I've got a rigid body, a capsule collider, and then this script which is controlling the camera. So I'm going to press play, and I should fall under the weight of gravity and hit the ground. And now when I move my mouse, I can move around. Now I'm quite low to the ground. I can press W, and suddenly I'm moving. and I can move through my environment, and I can look around and can move up my hill here and get myself to a position where I've got a better view of the world, so I can spin around and look at everything and then negotiate my way around here. Okay, so I'm going to hit escape so I can see my mouse, and then I'm going to cancel out of the game. So there are many things I can do here. I can change the height, for example, of the controller, and then when I press play and I fall to the ground, I am not stuck in the grass, so I'm a little bit taller. I have a whole series of settings that I can change, and as we progress through the next couple of weeks, we'll look at all of the amazing possibilities that are available to us in Unity. But for now, so we're 35 minutes in or so, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have a run around this island, and we'll see. It's not exactly Far Cry, but with a half an hour behind us and some very basic tools, we'll have made something that is of that genre. So I'm going to click on this button here, maximize on play. I'm going to press play, and I'm going to hit escape. So it's playing a small window in a big window. So we'll have a look here. So this is so I should be in HD mode. I'm on display. I'm sorry, I've got split screen here, so it's trying to play on two screens simultaneously. Okay, and I'm going to press play. So here's my game that we have created in an extraordinarily short amount of time. And as I said, while it's not Far Cry 5, for half an hour's worth of work using preset assets and functions from our game engine, it's not too bad, and I have paid money for worse, unfortunately. Okay, so we'll leave it at that for now, and we will continue on. If we have more time in class, we'll add in more whistles and more bells. So that's enough for now.